G'day guys, Will here, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to take a closer look at the Antec Torque case, which I showed you briefly in the previous video where we looked over all of the hardware that's going to be going into our ultimate sim racing PC build. So there's a couple of things that I absolutely love about this case and a couple of things that I'm not so keen on. And you're probably wondering, why did I buy this case if there's things that I'm not keen on? So I'm going to cover all of that in detail in this video. We're also going to start to actually plan out our build and everything as well. So we'll have a look at how the motherboard's going to fit in, how the radiators are going to fit in, how our reservoir is going to go in, pump, all those kinds of things, power supply as well. So we probably won't actually mount everything in this video, but we'll sort of have a good look at it, see how everything's going to fit, and that will hopefully give you guys a good idea of exactly whether this case is going to work for the build that you're planning as well. So this case retails for $350 US or around 450 Australian dollars if you're in Australia like me. And I've got to say straight off the bat that I do believe that it is overpriced for what you're getting for the money. Now, it is very good quality. There's no quality issues whatsoever. Everything's nice and machined. There's no sharp edges. Everything is really nice and precise. And, you know, it feels like a high quality, expensive piece of kit. But when you consider what you can get for the money in other cases, then it starts to become a little bit more questionable. So I'm talking things like it doesn't come with any fans, it doesn't come with any cable management, it doesn't even come with any Velcro straps or anything like that. So you really are completely on your own. There's no fan controller, there's no nothing. There's literally nothing more to it than a couple of pieces of glass, a couple of pieces of aluminium, a couple of ports and wires and things like that. And that is pretty much it. So just be aware that you are going to have to spend a little bit of additional money to get things like a fan controller, cable management and stuff like that. Now for me, that's not too much of an issue. I had most of that stuff laying around anyway that I was going to be using for this build. And because we're going to be doing a lot of customization here anyway, it wasn't really a problem for me. But do just consider that if you're looking at one of these cases, that, you know, there are a lot of other options on the market for around the same price that do come with fans, do come with fan controllers, and really sort of give you a lot more for the money. So before we go any further, you've probably already figured this out by now, but I did pay full retail for this case. It's not a sponsored video in any way, and all of the things that I'm going to be saying to you in this video are all my own opinion with no pressure or no commitments to any third party whatsoever. So with that in mind, let's press ahead and start to take a look at the case in some more detail. All right, so a quick look at what we get in the package. Now, as I said at the start of the video, there really isn't much to this whatsoever. So we've got a couple of these little spaces here which are to mount our glass panels. So two for the front of the case, and I'll show you where they mount a little bit later on. And then these additional spaces as well, which you install if you want to install the glass panels. So I'm assuming that you can run this with no glass panels as it sort of comes out of the box and everything's there. So it's nice that they give you the provision to sort of add those as additional, so you're not sort of having to have horrible standoffs sitting there that look out of place if you don't want to have the glass panels installed. These are the panels themselves. So they're 4mm thick tempered glass, which is nice, very good quality. No problems at all there. Now, one of the things that you probably will be wondering is whether or not the glass is tinted. So it is kind of tinted this kind of bluish color, and it'll be interesting to see what that looks like once we've finished building. But you can see there, peel off the plastic a little bit, and it does have that sort of bluish tinge to it. So it'd be nice if there was an option that came with, you know, just straight clear glass or just a normal sort of dark tint rather than the sort of funny blue color. Now, inside the little package here, again, very, very basic. We've got a little leaflet here with some warranty information, Antec quality 1-year warranty. So we get a 1-year manufacturer's warranty, and then we've got our little quick start guide here, which basically just shows you how to assemble and disassemble the various different bits and pieces. So this shows how the glass panels attach to the side and how it kind of all comes apart. Now, one of the things that I do really like about this is how easy it is to disassemble to access different areas of the case. And I'll show you that in more detail in a moment. But you can see here, lots of disassembly instructions, and that is pretty much it. So not a whole lot of information here. You can see here also importantly that there is provision for a 3.5-inch and a 2.5-inch drive as well. So that's good that they do include that, because there isn't provision for very much else inside this case. Now, we also get an Allen key for removing the various different hex bolts that are inside there. Some little rubber shims for the glass panels. Those basically mount on the sides of these. So it slides over and then it goes in the little hole. Again, we'll show you that a little bit later on. and then a bunch of mounting screws and things like that for various different bits and pieces. And that is literally all you get inside the case. So that explains why I didn't bother doing an unboxing video. Okay, so before we get started on disassembly, let's just have a quick look at exactly what inputs and outputs we have here. So a couple of USB 3s, we've got our on, off and reset switch there. We've got a headphone jack, a microphone jack, and a USB-C as well. So it's great that they include a USB-C port. Most modern cases these days have that anyway though, but it is great that it's there. Now we also have a little Antec logo here as well that illuminates, but we'll have a look at that later on once everything is built. And if we flip the case around quickly as well, we can see that all of the cables that run out of the back of the I/O panel are basically just bundled up here. There's enough length on those that they can run down the channel behind, sort of tuck in behind on this white panel here. At least that's what I'm hoping. And then we can run them into the bottom of the case and out of the way. So it shouldn't have too many problems concealing wiring. It is going to be a bit of a challenging build though, because there's not a whole lot of space to conceal wires and things like that. Now the Antec logo itself illuminates off an old style Molex connector there as well. It would have been nice if it was SATA power, I think, but it doesn't really matter. It's an extension anyway. It just means we're going to have to run an additional cable out of our power supply to light up that logo, but no big deal there, just letting you know what it is. But we've got basically the normal sort of headers here. We've got our HD audio header, we've got our USB-C, USB 3, and our little jumpers for the power switch and power LED. Alright, so we're going to start off by removing the front panel here. We'll remove the top panel, the side panel, and this lower panel as well. So it's all pretty straightforward. Start off by just loosening off the screws. Now we want to be a little bit careful here that we don't damage the material at all. We don't want to scratch it and make it sort of go silver, anything like that. So just nice and light. Now the cool thing here is we don't actually need to take these screws all the way out, apart from one on the opposing side. So I'll flip it around quickly and show you. You can see here they're all slotted apart from the bottom one here. So we just basically undo or loosen it off a little bit, enough that it can slide up. And then we remove the one screw here, which is kind of the one that's holding it all in place, or kind of securing it in place anyhow. We remove that screw entirely. And then the whole panel should basically just slide up and off like so. So next off, we're gonna move on to the side panels. Top panel and then this side as well. So we'll start off with this one. Now I'm also going to remove the 4 screws, 2 on either side, that secure this I/O panel in place as well, simply because I want to be able to lay the case on its side when I'm installing hardware, and this obviously is going to get bent if I'm sitting it flat on a desk. So we'll remove these screws as well. Okay, so the next thing that I want to show you guys is just quickly test fitting the 2 radiators, the power supply, as well as the pump. We'll sort of move the pump into place, won't fix it down for now. I just want to basically put these key components in place and then measure the various different clearances for you guys so you can see exactly how much space you're going to have when you implement it all into your own build. Now obviously you might be using different radiators and fans and things like that from me, and that's fine, but this will give you a basic idea of exactly how things are going to lay out. So let's get that done. Okay, so we've got our top and front radiators installed here. Now we've run into our first little tiny snag. Now there is enough clearance here to access the fittings provided you don't have a fan on the first port of the radiator. But you can see here with the fan installed, the fitting is literally right up against that fan. So if you had a different design fan, you could be in trouble there. So I think the safest bet is probably going to end up being installing the radiator the other way up so it fills and empties from the bottom, which isn't a problem at all. I may even end up doing that or intentionally doing that anyway, but I just wanted to let you guys know if you are running a 60mm radiator, the clearance is quite tight between the top and the front, so you might need to go with a slimmer radiator on the top or something like that depending on your fan configuration, but not a big problem, just something that you do need to be aware of. Now in the bottom of the case, we've got plenty of room to play around here. This was the area that I was actually the most concerned about. I was concerned that with a really fat power supply like the AX1200, I might have problems with clearance at the back here, not being able to plug my power supply cables in. What I'll probably do is plug those in first and run them out the side and then install the pump. We've got plenty of room here to move the pump forward and back depending on where our reservoir ends up sitting, so we can line up the inlet with the outlet of the reservoir. But we've got plenty of room, we can run that right up against the radiator here without problems, and we should have plenty of clearance. So what I'll do now is rotate the radiator 180 degrees so that the ports are on the bottom, and then we'll see if we can find a tidy way to line that up with the pump and all that kind of thing as well. See if we end up doing it that way or whether we keep it the way it is now. So we'll go ahead and do that and then we'll take another quick look. But just so you can see there, with a 60mm radiator and the pump right up against the edge of that, so it's not quite touching, because obviously we don't want to transfer vibration through and make all sorts of noises, so we want to try and keep it a little bit separate. We've got about 2 inches to the back of the power supply or 5 centimeters depending on where you are in the world. So plenty of space to plug in our cables. All right, so we've flipped the radiator around 180 degrees and you can see we've got bigger problems when we have it this way around. So with the pump sort of pushed up against there to give enough clearance for the plugs on the back of the power supply, we now don't really have enough room to fit a fitting, or even an angled fitting, even a 90-degree angle fitting. You can see there, if I try to install that there, the pump kind of has to sit further back like this, and then that doesn't give us enough space to install our power supply cables. So the radiator is definitely going to have to go the other way up. We're just going to have to try and push the radiators as far as we possibly can. We might even be able to drill some more holes just to move this radiator down a little bit, give ourselves a little bit more clearance. I think we'll definitely be able to work around it, but just something to be aware of. If you are using 60mm radiators, you are more likely, unless you're going to locate your pump somewhere else or you've got a all-in-one reservoir or something like that, you are going to run into problems if you want to run your pump down the very bottom here and have fittings down here as well. So just comes down to how you want to lay things out. We could even also, you know, sit the pump on top of the power supply or something like that if we wanted to, but I want to try and keep it as tidy as I possibly can. So we definitely want to try and have the pump down in here if at all possible. So I'll keep playing around with it and I'll come back when I've figured out the solution. So after a good number of hours of experimenting and changing things around, trying to find the best solution for my particular needs, this is what I've landed on. So a couple of 90-degree angle fittings on the bottom of the radiator there. So the radiator has the ports at the bottom now instead of the top. That removes the issue of the clearance at the top that we discussed earlier. And the pump is able to sort of just tuck underneath those fittings quite cleanly. I'm going to have to build some sort of a bracket to mount the pump underneath there, and I'll show you that in a bit more detail later. And then we've also got this angle bracket here and a bit of an assortment of various different EK parts coming out. So this is going to be our outlet from the pump, and it's also going to serve as our drain port in the bottom as well. And as you'll see in a moment when I flip the camera around, it actually lines up really nicely. So looking at it side on, you'll have the outlet from the pump sitting sort of here. You can't see that. I'll remove the side panel for you in a moment so you can see. But then the drain port is going to sit about there. So it'll just poke out the side there, and it'll have a little plug on it as well. Now I haven't got the male-to-male fittings yet. They're still in the post, so I can't rig it all up now. But that is effectively what it's going to look like. So I'll just quickly remove these side panels again so you can see exactly how things are laid out. So pump will sit on a bracket here. I'll need to go down to the local hardware store and pick something up. Some sort of just a 90-degree angle bracket should do fine. I'll have to drill a couple of holes in the case. And then this is going to sit like that there. Empty port will be here, so the valve will sit there. And the good thing about this is it's fully adjustable as well, so we can adjust the angles here it'll sit down nicely and just kind of flop against the edge when it's not being used. We've also got plenty of adjustment here as well, so we can move angles around and do whatever we want for our pipe coming out, up to probably the graphics card will be the first thing in the loop, I think, but we're still sort of figuring out exactly what we're going to do there. And then we've got our fittings here, so we've got our inlet outlet as well. So the reservoir was an area that I had to make a bit of a compromise. Originally I had that really long 400mm tube that I was going to use, but unfortunately with the pump mounted down here and the radiator and fan mounted, it was just too tight of a squeeze. So what we're going to end up doing is mounting the reservoir about here. We'll have it drain down into the entry of the pump here, or the inlet of the pump, and then the return from probably the CPU or one of the radiators will come in here as well. So we'll have a couple of pipes running in behind, one sort of bend in front, the other will bend behind. Still got to figure out exactly how we're going to lay everything up, but it's going to sit somewhere around about here. So we'll have to build some sort of a mounting mechanism to mount it on there, probably just some spacers and bolts or something like that. I've got the EK mounting brackets already. I've also got some mounting brackets that mount on the back of the radiator on their way as well. So we've got a couple of different options that we can play around with to get the best and tidiest fitment. But that is basically how it's all going to lay out. Then this obviously will sit about there. We've got the other white panel which kind of covers this area as well. So all you really see is just the glass area of the reservoir with a little bit of the pipes coming out as well, and it hides all of the messiness. So I think that's going to end up working out pretty well. Now, one other quick observation as well that I just want to show you quickly is that this bracket here for the GPU really isn't particularly strong at all. It's got quite a lot of flex in it. And I am actually genuinely concerned that when we mount our vertical GPU bracket, the weight of it's actually going to flex and bend it. So it's going to be something that we're going to have to be very careful when we move the case around. Obviously being water cooled, we don't want to be moving and flexing and having things break and snap. So I think we're going to have to come up with some sort of a support mechanism as well. Now, my graphics card did actually come with a little support bar. I'm hoping that I'll be able to somehow sort of integrate that, sit it on top of the PSU or something like that, and have it sort of sitting in the bottom so that it supports it a little bit more. But just something to be aware of there. I really do think they could have done a better job of how this is implemented, because it really isn't particularly strong, especially if you're running SLI or something like that. There's a lot of weight there that's sort of basically just held in place by 3 screws. So I'll spin the case around quickly so you can see. And there you go. So that entire bracket is only held in place by those 3 screws there, and that is literally it. So a little bit concerned about that, but I have seen people build these before, but it is definitely not something that you'd be wanting to cart around to LAN parties and stuff like that. It's definitely a sit it in place and never touch it again kind of arrangement, I think. But we'll find a way around it. We'll persevere, and I'm sure that we'll figure things out. Okay, so one other little thing that I need to let you know about. Now, this isn't a problem by any means, but just something to be aware of. The screws that come with your EK radiators are exactly the right length for a standard sort of case which has a really thin pressed metal, whereas this case has the nice CNC machined thicker aluminium, which means that the screws that come with your radiators are generally not going to fit. So the case actually comes with longer screws in the box. So you just need to be very careful where you use them, because obviously in areas where you're screwing through a fan into a radiator or something like that, you want to use the ones that are provided with the radiator that are a little bit shorter. If you use the screws that were supplied with the case, they're going to end up punching through the fins of the radiator or potentially even damaging the core. So you need to be very careful of that. But anywhere where you're mounting a radiator to the chassis itself or through the chassis, you're going to need to use the longer screws that are supplied with the case. So it's great that they sort of foresaw that issue and included the screws, but just be very, very careful where you use them, because obviously you don't want to be damaging any of your radiators. But yeah, just use some common sense and you won't have any problems whatsoever there. Okay, so how do I feel about this case at this point of the build? So I feel like I've been a little bit negative in this video so far. I've been pointing out a lot of problems and things like that, and I think that can be a little bit unfair at times, because the reality is whenever you're building a custom loop, unless it's a case that you've worked with before and you're very familiar with, you're always going to run into snags. You're always going to run into things that don't quite line up the way that you kind of imagine they would in your head before all the parts arrive. And I think that the challenges that I've faced so far with this pretty typical of any custom water loop, and I definitely had all the same problems and more when I was building in the Fantex Evolve case previously, and that all worked out perfectly in the end. But honestly, guys, the only real concern that I have with this case is just the strength of the mounting bracket here. I'm really quite concerned that I'm going to have to do some sort of reinforcement there to make sure that my GPU doesn't sort of sag And, you know, obviously being water cooled as well, we don't want to have any sag because that can compromise the connections and we can end up having problems with leaks and things like that. So I think that's definitely something that they should be looking at improving. Maybe even if it was welded on or something like that, just to make it a little bit stronger rather than just sitting on with 3 screws there. Or some sort of a secondary reinforcement mechanism. But otherwise, I'm really happy with the case so far. Obviously, if I'd gone with thinner radiators or a double instead of a triple at the top, that would have made installation a lot easier, but I wanted to have the maximum possible cooling capacity. But look, overall, the construction is really nice and solid. The CNC machining is really clean. There's no sharp edges or, you know, little metal tags or anything like that. There's nothing that you're going to cut yourself on, which is awesome. These days, cases are generally pretty good in that regard. I remember back in the 90s when I was first building PCs, if you didn't cut your hands to shreds, you basically weren't doing it right. But this is really clean, really solid construction, and really, other than that GPU bracket, there's no problems at all that you wouldn't come across when you're doing any other sort of water cooling loop. So all in all, I'd say I'm very happy with it. I do think that it's a little bit on the expensive side considering there's no real provision for cable management or anything like that. But as long as it does what you want and you're happy with the way it looks and everything, I really don't see any reason to not recommend this case. So hopefully you guys have found this video insightful and interesting. Obviously, we're going to be progressing through the build now. We've got to put in all of our other hardware. We've also got to flush out our radiators. So I'm going to be taking everything back out of the case now, flushing it all out, making sure it's all ready to go. And we've also got to wait for a couple of extra little adapters and fittings to arrive as well. So I'm not exactly sure what the next video is going to be yet in the build. We'll sort of do a bit of experimentation and see exactly where things go. But anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. Stick around because we're only just getting started, and I will see you guys again soon. Bye.